What's up, everyone? Welcome to another Card Advantage video. Today I'm joined by Pankaj from the EthnicSmoke YouTube channel. If you haven't watched and subscribed to his channel, I highly recommend it. I'll put a link up for you guys to click on. There's tons of strategy and deep dive rules content on his channel. But most importantly, there's a bunch of gameplay analysis where he walks through his own games and shows you guys the decisions he made and things he could have changed, stuff like that. And that is the topic of today's video. We are going to be jumping into why and how you guys can record your games and do analysis for them, and why I thought Pankaj would be a great person to collaborate on for this specific video.
Right, thanks for having me on, Jacob. Really exciting. I watch your streams like every Tuesday, as you know. This is
Yeah.
really good to be on here.
Yeah, so with that being said, we're just going to hop into there's a couple different sections we're going through, but you can get us started on why you think it's really important to analyze your own gameplay.
Yeah, so the first thing is that I think it's helpful for every single skill level that you're at. So like when I got into the game, I started with looking at my replays when I was like just starting out, like basically just learning the game, and it was super useful then. And even now, like after, I've played like competitively and stuff, I still watch my replays and still just have so much to learn. Like there's so much depth in this game, and there's so many decision points that you're always gonna catch something, like no matter what skill level you're at. And the next thing is that, especially in this current season where we're in between competitive seasons, it's a great like off-season activity to like help improve and self-reflect on your games. When you don't need to be so concerned about developing your tier one deck, for this matter, you can really be
Yeah.
concerned about honing your gameplay completely.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. I think a lot it's definitely good to take breaks in the off season. First of all, we're not trying to
Mm-hmm.
like pressure everyone to just
Yeah.
go ham all year long, but when you are on the off season and you're not trying to develop like whatever the most insane thing is, or you're only playing one deck, it's definitely a great tool to use for self improvement.
That being said, it's also a great tool during the season. I do
Oh yeah.
also use it during the season.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah.
Yeah, but additionally, for despite your skill level, this being a useful tool, I think despite your opponent's skill level, this can be a very decent tool. Especially now that everyone's kind of playing on Talishar, you're finding random opponents.
Mm-hmm.
I think the skill level of Flesh and Blood players is actually increasing quite a lot, and
Yep.
both of our channels were aiming to increase the skill level of everyone. But
Mm-hmm.
even when you're playing against opponents that are not necessarily like up to a normal opponent you might find in like a pro quest or even higher, this is still super useful because you're mostly going to be analyzing what your decisions are being made during the game. And even if you like skill gapped your opponent, it was an easy win, it's possible that it could have been an even easier win if you like changed some of your decisions. Or it's also very possible that you like made a horrible decision that could have thrown the game and the opponent just didn't know how to capitalize on it.
Mm-hmm.
So every I would go as far as to say every single recorded gameplay, unless you're like tip top of the skill level on a certain hero and you really need an opponent like a super high skill level opponent to challenge you, I think most games are going to have interesting things to learn from. So you can analyze the decisions you made and analyze the decisions your opponents made, despite whether they were correct or not, to gain tidbits of knowledge and things to improve on it.
Yeah, like in a nutshell, like I don't think anyone has ever played a perfect game of Fab, and so
Yeah.
when you look back on your game, you get to see the imperfections and learn from them.
Yeah, and the original reason I wanted to start analyzing my gameplay analysis, like I realized when I would watch like Twitch streams or other people's YouTube videos of gameplay, I would just like casually notice like, oh, I think I would have done something different there, or I would have done something different here. And especially if you're like a Twitch chat user and you just notice every single mistake, trust me, when you're watching your own gameplay, it'll be exactly the same. You'll notice your own mistakes way easier when you're watching after the fact than you are playing in the game. So just keep that in mind. Uh, definitely, definitely gonna notice your mistakes like that.
Yeah, I feel like this is really wild, but you really won't believe this until you try it. But the misplays you catch when you're watching yourself versus when you're actually playing is just astronomical. Like because I think it's got to do with like when you're playing, it's very easy to get like caught up or overwhelmed with everything that's going on, everything that you're tracking, right? You're tracking, oh, my opponent has pitched one red pummel, they've played one pummel, you're tracking all that, you draw up, you're like, okay, this is a line I want to do. But then when you're just watching yourself, it just gives you a bit of distance that
Mm.
that really helps with oops that really helps with analyzing what the optimal play should be, like
Yeah.
in this situation. Honestly, just like Twitch chat.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and like just leading into that, like I think one of the most important skills, like as a fab player, is to not get overly attached to the line of play that you want to take. So like for you draw up, you think of the sequence that you want to do, and you're like, okay, these are the cards I want to block with. You have that all lined up, but then sometimes your opponent throws a curveball at you, right? So sometimes they give you an on hit that you have to block, or they put a CMH on the field, and you're like, wait, I need to disrupt that somehow. And I feel like when you're in the game and you've already gotten attached to the sequence that you want to do, it's difficult to like break out of that. But like when you watch yourself, you'll be like, wait, I should have just like blocked in my red and sent this like blue ice vein just so it disrupts them a little on the CMH turn or something like that. Mm.
Yeah, I think there's tons of reasons why everyone should try recording their own gameplay. But just in general, like if you want to get better at the game, if all you do all day long is play games, like you said, once you're in the game, you're focused on that. You're focused on remembering your tuning counter or pitch stacking a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
After the game, all of your mental space is freed up to watch the game and rethink about everything. So it's really going to accelerate the rate at which you get better at the game. I definitely think you should supplement the gameplay jamming with gameplay analysis as well. And before we jump into specifically the things we look at and focus on when we do our own gameplay analysis, I'm just going to briefly note there's a couple applications I have on the screen right now: OBS Studio and Streamlabs. That's what we like to use to record our games. And then when we watch gameplay recordings, I personally love using this application called VLC Media Player. It's not default installed on Windows, but you can go find an installation for it. This application allows you to like fast forward way more than 2 times speed. So if you like do a lot of thinking in game, you can skip through that, and the analysis doesn't have to be boring. It's not like you're just staring at yourself think for 5 minutes before you do something. You can skip around, and that really does help with analysis. And then you can always just upload to a private YouTube channel and make your stuff like unlisted and or private, so you're the only one that can view it. And YouTube has fast forward and stuff like that, and it can store all your stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
these are the tools I would recommend to use. There's tons of videos on how to use these tools, so I wouldn't do like a tutorial in this video itself just to keep it short. But yeah, I think these are the good tools that you can
Yeah, for
check
sure.
out for trying to do this type of stuff.
Yeah. Just for I guess a bit of context, I use OBS to record my games, and then to watch them, I actually just use the default media player on Windows because what matters to me is more like just the skip function. Like if
Yeah.
I can press the right arrow key and it fast forwards like 5 seconds or something.
Mhm.
That matters more to me than like the 2 times speed. But yeah, it's up to you.
Yeah. I'm a very impatient video watcher. I also just
Mhm.
watch normal videos in 2 times speed, so
Ah.
that's probably why I do that.
Mhm.
But yeah, we'll go ahead and go through a bunch of ideas and things that we like to focus on when we're doing gameplay analysis and specific things that it can help you do outside of a normal just playing the game. So why don't you start us
Mhm.
off?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing that we have is analyze both your losses and your wins. Like I said earlier, right? Like no one's ever played a perfect game except maybe Michael Hamilton. So yeah, so you have stuff to learn from whether you lost the game or whether you won the game, right? I think a key thing is that you could have done everything right and still lost, and you could have done everything wrong and still won because it's a card game, and also skill of the opponent matters. The cards lined up also matter. So analyzing both your losses and your wins are both like very, very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Another tip for doing gameplay analysis is don't always watch your gameplay immediately after the game happens. Um, So outside of just gameplay analysis, a lot of fab players have pretty good memory. Normally, if you're not doing gameplay analysis, you remember a play you made during the game. You're like, oh, immediately after the game, you're like, oh, I probably should have changed that, or I could have fixed this, or I got punished immediately for this certain play. But it actually, in my opinion, helps if you wait a little bit, maybe even a day or a couple hours, and then you go in and watch because it will give you a fresh mind. You won't be tied to like the decisions you made in the game. You'll be more willing to like realize, oh, I could have changed something. Additionally, like this is a less common factor, but like if the game was so bad you got like tilted from it, or like it was a really long and like difficult game, you might just be a little bit exhausted. Like Flesh and Blood games are 50-minute like max length rounds. That's a long time to be like having your brain turned on full speed.
Hmm.
So just like waiting a little bit after the gameplay happens before you go back in and watch the recording yourself, is going to have help you have fresh takes on the plays you made, as well as just like have more energy to actually analyze it and get value out of the replay.
Yeah, for sure. And it definitely helps with that not being overly attached to the lines that you made, which I think is very critical for when you look back at the game. So
Mm.
if you're attached to a line, if you're like, oh yeah, I made that line was the correct line, and you look at it, you're just gonna reinforce yourself. You'll be like, oh yeah, I see that happened, and so that was good. But you that may cause you to miss that was actually a better line.
Yeah.
And so, sort of leaning into that, like try to look at it as if like it was someone else's game. Like honestly, yeah, get into like a Twitch chat mentality when you're watching it, and just be as critical as you can. You just want to like bash this person, in chat. And yeah, so just do whatever you can to be as critical of your plays. And don't get into the sort of positive or confirmation bias because it's like yourself and
Mm.
you're like, oh yeah, I made the correct plays here.
Yeah, and I think you should really just question everything. Like even if a play looked like it was the correct play, just like take a half a second and be like, I was there another option that I didn't consider in game, and then dive into that like decision tree and see if it made sense. But yeah, aside from analyzing every single play just as it comes, I would even recommend using rewind and fast forward to kind of skip through and see the consequences live. I've even, when I was first learning Bravo, I've literally rewinded to the beginning of the game to double check if like a certain hand I pitch stacked or if it was like a hand that just came up before I hit my pitch stack. Like you have that ability to do that in a replay analysis. So that is like an obvious suggestion. But even something where during a game, if I like let a command and conquer hit instead of like blocking it out, I could maybe try to fast forward and look what was in my hand, what was in my opponent's hand, and what would the consequences be if I made a different play. Obviously, you're not going to have perfect information in game, so it's not something that you could always be able to do in game. But if you can get into the habit of like analyzing the decision tree based on perfect information, it'll actually help you build that kind of skill set for kind of coming up with the decision tree in game based on the information you do have. So it's not obviously you're not always going to be able to predict exactly what your opponent's going to do, and in a gameplay analysis, you just know what's in your opponent's hand. But practicing these type of things during gameplay analysis also helps you do them in the actual game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so next thing I want to talk about is like pause at the beginning of each hand. So, in the replay when you're watching, you've just drawn up. I'll recommend just pausing right here. And that's when you try and map out the line that you think you should do, which I think it does mimic like what you do in game itself. I think most people do this. You draw up and you're like, okay, what is the line I want to take? Do I want to arsenal this card? Do I just want to play it out here? What do I want to block with? And yeah, doing that again when you're watching the replay helps a lot. And this goes back to what you were talking about earlier about just like in the game when you're so caught up with all the mechanical things that you have to do, right? You taking up your tunic, or like if you're Ice Ender, remembering your frostbite triggers, your Briar, remembering embodiment triggers. Just like pausing when you draw up and then just thinking of the line here when you don't have to worry about any of those technical details, like helps a lot. And yeah, and since you're not actually playing against someone else, you can really just take your time here. Whereas, in game, you can't just take like 10 minutes to figure out what your optimal line is.
Yeah, for sure. And this even
Mm.
goes as far as like if there was a really interesting line, like when Viserai was super popular, some Viserai like hands can just do literally 12 different things, especially if you're playing like Tomo the Arcanine and you don't know what you're going to draw or things like that. You could really dive deep into branching play patterns with some heroes in this game. So if you find like an instance where you could have done that in a replay analysis, if you have like friends that play Flesh and Blood or like a team or just anybody like at your locals, like take a screenshot of it and be like, hey, this is my 5 card hand. What would you have done with it? Sometimes there's
Mhm.
really interesting decisions you can go down to and really dive into that. And that's just the more times you go through that path in your own brain, it's going to really develop like muscle memory for arriving at the correct conclusion faster in game.
Yeah, Vishra is actually such a good example just because like Become the Arknight and Rattlebones are just
Mm.
like ridiculous. Become the Arknight, all right, you have access to your whole deck. Rattlebones, you have access to your whole graveyard. All right, what do you want
Yeah.
to do? It's just, yeah, I think Belittle Briar is another one. Honestly, I
Mm.
guess Creepers also just makes all the lines in Runeblade just the decision tree just like become exponentially larger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even when you're playing practice games, like you don't like you want to respect your opponent's time. You don't want to just take all this time to analyze. So even in
Hmm.
practice games, you might feel pressured to not find the most optimal line. But if you're looking at a
Yeah.
replay analysis, you can take as much time as you need. So,
And then that helps you save time when you're actually in game, like later on.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
The last thing I wanted to note for the specific sections of improving your own gameplay is trying to figure out what assumptions you have made in the game and what assumptions you can make. I think a hard skill set to develop in this game is figuring out what your opponent is able to do and what they might be likely to do. It's also hard to kind of it's hard to explain, but if you can somehow get a read that your opponent has a certain attack reaction, or they arsenal to defense reaction, or I was watching your Icelander analysis and you got to read that your opponent arsenal to red instead of a blue, these assumptions can help you make decisions in game. And maybe while you're playing that game, you didn't make that assumption, but while you're watching the replay, you figured out, oh, based on this play, I could have figured out that they have this card in hand, or this is the likely pattern they're going to take. Um, not only is replay good for just finding your misplays, it's also good for just getting a sense of game flow and getting a sense of what assumptions you can be making, so that you can use those skills in game in the future.
And I think I think your comment about it's difficult to explain is very, very accurate. Because yeah, I found it very difficult to explain as well. And I think you feel this a lot when you switch heroes. Like, you know,
Mm,
at this point with Iceland, I'm familiar enough that I like to call it like I have my pulse on the game.
yeah.
Like, you know, that if that just like fits right, I guess. But if I switch hero, I'm suddenly like, wait, I have no idea like who's winning right now.
Mhm.
Or like what's the state of the game is right now, like what either of us are playing towards. And I think like watching replays really helps you get there. Like noticing those key patterns of like when your opponent like arsenals that, like what are they likely to have, like based on just things that have been happening the past few turns.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
So there's tons of different things you could analyze. I'm sure there's plenty more than just the ones we brought up here. But the
Mhm.
last section we were going to talk about is actually deck development and watching replays, because this is going to help you like maybe work on sideboards or something like that. But what do you have to say about this one?
Yeah, so deck development, yeah, this is huge. I mean, so there's definitely a bit of overlap, obviously, of jamming a lot of games and also analyzing replays
Yeah.
for deck development. So I'm just gonna, I mean, so these things are gonna apply to both, but I'm just gonna say like, so certain things like I'm watching myself, I'm like, wait, I drew a whole bunch of block twos here. Or I drew like Oasis with my Sigil of Permafrost, you know, back in the dark days when we used to run Sigil of Permafrost. Like it was like watching replays like kind of really emphasized how awkward some of these cards were, and they were like, "Okay, you know what? I think I need to cut this card, unless I'm like full on the Frostex game plan or something." So yeah, and like just stuff like this. Oh, you're like, oh, I didn't draw enough ice cards. I didn't draw enough of my elemental cards of your Briar or something, to fuse with, or even something as fundamental as not enough blues. I feel like I'm watching myself play, and in so many of my hands, I didn't draw enough blues. So things like this really help you find out your ratios. So elemental cards, your pitch, your resource curve, and then there's also the more specific stuff like, wait, do you want this defense reaction in? Is this affecting your gameplay too much? Because I think there was a time where some aggro decks were like, oh, when you run a whole bunch of like Sync Belows, or Oasis Respites and a Runeblade Mirrors and stuff, and then eventually like, wait, no, this is way too awkward to actually make work. And I think watching replays helps you accelerate to making those conclusions, because you can jam like 10 games, but I feel like if you play like 5 games, analyze a couple of replays, and you'll get to the same conclusion anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also just tends to be a different mentality when you're jamming games to develop a deck, or jamming games to get better at playing a deck. So
Right.
that mentality is kind of hard to switch on and off when you're playing a game. I think a really easy trap to fall into is when you're developing a deck, just trying to do at all costs to win, and this could lead you to make like the best play based on the cards you have, but ignore the fact that those could have just been different cards. Like everyone, obviously, if you're in a tournament and you have a 4 red hand, it's like you're not going to sit there and be like, "Oh, I should have added more blues to my deck." You're going to figure out what's the best play you can make with the 4 reds. So even if you
Mm,
do that during a practice game, you might end up making a certain play. But in the replay analysis, you're like, I just noticed like 3 out of my 10 hands in this game were 4 reds, and my deck cannot function without a single blue. I probably need to add a blue to it. So having that overall view of your game after the fact can help you determine those ratios and stuff.
But a very big thing as well is like when you're watching a replay, you get to sort of like hypothesize where like, okay, I'm gonna watch this replay, but assume all my Winter's Bites are brain freezers instead.
Yeah.
Like, how does that change? Or like my Oasis Respites are sink pillows instead. Like, does this make my hands a lot less awkward to play and stuff like that? That just helps you like theorize a little where you want your deck building to go.
Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
I think specifically for deck building, there's a lot of value to be gained, but in general, just as a new player, I highly recommend watching your own replays and trying to just learn from your decisions, learn from your mistakes, and don't just jam games. Like there's not much more to say. Like we covered a bunch of stuff in the video, but
Mm-hmm.
I can't recommend it enough. Like when I first started playing, watching my own replays, I think was one of the main things that helped me get better personally.
For sure, me too. Although, yeah, again, like what you said, this is a supplement for jamming games. It's not a replacement. You can't just jam one game, watch one replay, and be like, "Okay, I'm done. I'm ready for the season."
Yeah.
But I think it's a supplement, and I think it's like an accelerant as well.
Mhm.
I do value. I don't know how to put a number to it, but I do value that watching a replay is worth like some number of just jamming games blindly because you jam games, you might be making the same mistakes, might be having the same assumptions,
Yeah.
but watching a replay really helps you break those down.
Yeah. I think if you haven't tried watching replays before, I really do think you'll be surprised at how many things you catch, especially if you're learning a brand new hero. Like you're in game, you're just making certain decisions, but some things I've seen myself do are just like the most obviously wrong play. And in game, I was just like, this is the only play that I have available to me. But after the fact, it's like, geez, I
Yeah,
could have done at least 2 other things.
yeah,
So there's just tons of benefit to be gained from it.
yep. And it's something that just happens. Even like I don't know. I do feel like I've played the game for quite a while, and it still happens. Like at this point, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I hope you guys found this video useful. Again, definitely check out Pankaj's channel, Ethnic Smoke. There's a lot of replay analysis on there. If you still don't have an idea of how you could approach it on your own, watch some of those videos and see how he approaches it and see what kind of plays he picks out and points out. I did replay analysis a long time ago. I haven't done it as much recently, but
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to get back into it because it's really good. At least posting it. I obviously I still do it on my own time, but
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. Like and subscribe to our channel and Ethnic Smoke if you like the video, and comment on what other things you want to see us talk about. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time.